The delivery. My name is Julie, and the story I'm about to tell you was probably the worst night in my life. It was a Wednesday. It was 5 o'clock when I walked through my front door after completing a long day at work. I collapsed on the couch. I was just so tired. I laid there for a few minutes, almost falling asleep, but willed myself to get up. I had to get out of these work clothes I'd been in all damn day. I jumped in the shower. My boyfriend would be home soon, and he would expect dinner waiting. But I was too damn tired to cook. So I got on Grubhub and ordered some food. It said it would take an hour, so I turned on the TV and waited. About 20 minutes after I ordered the food, I got a call from my boyfriend, telling me he had to work late tonight, and he wouldn't be home until near midnight. I was disappointed, and after a short argument, I just hung up. I wasn't in the mood to fight. 10 minutes later, I got a notification from Grubhub saying Todd would be delivering my food in 20 minutes. Todd looked like a regular dude. Nothing to be worried about, I thought. It didn't really matter, though, because I told him to just leave the food by the front door. Right on the dot, 20 minutes later, Todd was knocking on my door with the food. I stood and waited a minute to make sure he left, but right when I reached the door handle, he knocked again. It startled me for a second. I snapped to and shouted through the door, "Just leave it there, please." I waited another minute, but again he knocked. This has happened before, multiple times when I've asked them to just leave the food by the door. I've still had to open it to confirm I've received my food. Frustrated at this point, I opened the door. But when I looked at his face, I realized it wasn't Todd. It wasn't the face I saw on my phone. Now, I wasn't too concerned because that's happened before, an order being transferred to another driver. I looked down at my phone, though, and it still said Todd delivered my food. I got a little scared at this point. I looked back up, and he was just staring at me, with this big, sinister-looking grin plastered across his greasy face. Before I could utter a word, he said, "Hello, darling. Here's your food. Smells delicious, doesn't it?" This seems like an awful lot of food for just you, sweetie. How about you invite me in, and we could have dinner for two? No. My boyfriend is inside. This is for both of us. No. Now don't lie, darling. There's no other car in the driveway, and I don't see anybody back there. I said, "Listen, he's in the bathroom. He'll be out any second now." I glanced down at his name badge to see what to call him, but to my horror, the name badge said Todd, and it had blood smudged across the lettering. I screamed, "Get out of here!" and slammed the door shut. I yelled through the door I was calling the police, so he better be leaving. I stared at him through the peephole. All he did was stand there and laugh. But after a minute, he turned toward his car and walked away. I backed away from the door into the living room, thinking my threat of calling the police had worked. I sighed a breath of relief. I sat the food on the table, but I noticed a red liquid seeping from one of the containers through the bag. I opened the bag, then opened the container on top. I couldn't believe my eyes. Before me sat a severed hand, pieces of flesh, and 2 eyeballs nestled on top of the food. I screamed out in terror. Just then a loud banging came from the sliding glass door in the kitchen. "Let me in, darling. I hope you don't mind. There was just so much food, I decided to invite Todd to join us for dinner." He laughed maniacally. I called the cops right away. and told them what had happened. I screamed that I was on the phone with the police and they were on their way, so he better leave. The operator told me to stay on the line and an officer would be there shortly, which they were. I opened the door and told the officer that he was in my backyard. But after a few minutes, the officer came back and said no one was there, just bloody handprints on the sliding glass door. His car was still parked in front of my house. The officers checked the car, and they found blood all throughout the front seat, the steering wheel, and the passenger seat. They then checked the trunk and found Todd's body. The police later found out poor Todd was abducted and killed sometime between his last delivery and mine. You would think it ended there, but the creep was never caught. That's the most terrifying part. He knows my name. He knows where I live. And I've been receiving strange calls lately. A man breathing heavily, then giggling sinisterly, can be heard. I scream, "Who is it?" But they never answer. It happens day and night. I'm losing my mind. I know it's him. He's out there. And I'm afraid it's just a matter of time. The Thing About Stalkers. The thing about stalkers, really, is they always make themselves known, which could get them a quick restraining order or an arrest. If it were me, well, you wouldn't even know I'm watching. You'd never know unless I want you to. I could be bluffing. I could be not. You'll never know. In the meantime, enjoy your new bed sheets. Figured you might need a new one. The police can't save you now. I was lying in bed by myself, nodding off to sleep, when I rolled over and saw someone standing in the corner of my room. He didn't even bother trying to hide himself. He just stood there, staring at me. It was too dark to make out a face, but I know the figure of a man holding a knife when I see one. I was too scared to scream, so I just lay there in my bed, accepting my fate. He walked over, his boots on my carpet, breaking the already horrifying silence, and leaned down to smell my hair and caress my face. After a minute or two, he walked out of my room. I waited half an hour to get up because I was too scared to even bat an eyelash. I called the cops, filed a report, and the man didn't show up again. I had so many questions. Was this just a random thing? Did I have a stalker? Am I a murder or sexual abuse target? I went to the police station again the next week in hopes of finding out more, thinking of the atrocities that could be my fate. An officer saw me crying and came over to hug me and console me. As he held me and let me cry onto his shoulder, he softly whispered into my ear, "You smell different when you're away." Nightly, unknown caller. Oh, not again. It's 1 a.m. Who is doing this to me? I decline the call on my phone. I'm exhausted, and I look over to see my husband looking sound asleep. Lucky him to always sleep through this. Every night for the past few days, I have been getting an unknown call on my phone through random numbers, always in the middle of the night. My husband doesn't wake to the calls, but tells me to turn my phone on silent. I'm a chief doctor, so I'm not able to do that because of work. This nightly calling was really taking a toll on my body and subsequently my work, as I barely fell asleep after the calls. The next night, I went out with my husband and a few friends to a bar for a much-needed night off. "Let's see if this devil calls you tonight. I would love to give them a piece of my mind," my friend exclaimed. "Is someone playing a joke on you?" another one asked. "Probably, but the first few times I picked up, it was just a bit of breathing, and then the line cut out. After that, I always just declined the call and failed going back to sleep. At least the person doesn't bother calling twice. We stay at the bar till 2 a.m., so my friends can see if there was a call, but there was nothing. Maybe this nonsense is finally over, I thought. However, the next day at 1 a.m., the call came again. How does this person know when to call me at the most inconvenient time? I asked my husband the next morning. Seems strange that they know when I'm fast asleep in bed. Maybe I have a stalker. I have no clue, dear, he mumbles as he goes out for the day for errands. Since he's out, I thought I would keep myself busy by cleaning. So much clutter, and I never find time to clean with my busy work schedule. As I cleaned things on my dresser, I noticed a strange box. I looked at it closely and noticed a small webcam. I was shocked. Are we being watched? Just as I run to my phone to call my husband about this, my phone rings. Unknown caller with a random number. "Hello?" I answered shakily. "I'm sorry. I didn't want this. I'm so sorry." "Who is this?" My heart was racing. I told him we should stop. He said it's okay. You work so much, you'll never notice. He wants to be with me, but we need the money. I honestly couldn't go through with it. Who is this? And what are you talking about? If he knew I hid that camera, he would kill me too. I can't go on with this. He pretends, but he's always awake. Don't let him suffocate you. Run! Just then, I hear my husband enter the house. My mom's stalker. I went to the kitchen to get a drink. While I was pouring water, I heard a message ding. I turned to see my mom's phone on charge. I didn't think anything of it, but as I put my glass in the sink, I heard another ding. Again, I didn't think about it, but less than a minute later, another ding. That was when it caught my attention. I stared at the phone for a few seconds, and then another ding. I began to walk towards the phone, but then I heard another ding. I picked up the phone and unlocked it. I stared at the messages. It was an unknown number, and the messages were unnerving. It said things like, "Where are you? I want to talk to you," etc. I thought of turning the phone's power off and telling my mom about it tomorrow. But when I felt the phone vibrate, I looked at it, and it almost gave me a heart attack. The message read, "You're not Margaret." I stared at the phone, completely shocked. I started to panic, and I looked around when I felt the phone vibrate again. Hesitantly, I looked down at it, and I was shocked. The message was a photo of me holding my mom's phone, taken from outside the kitchen window. My son. "Go get him, Jake!" I yelled as my son came onto the soccer field. Today was the finals. My son's team was playing the Wolves, the best team in the division. I've been to every one of my son's games, and I know just how good of a player he is. He'll do foundations, faking out the defender till he falls on his butt. My son's amazing. The game began with the Wolves getting kickoff. They passed the ball around efficiently, but my son read one of the passes and stole the ball, passing it back to our goalie for safekeeping. "Great job, Jake!" My son turned his head to the crowd, quickly scanning the faces till he met mine. I smiled and waved. He had a quizzical look on his face, but returned his attention to the game as his team was moving the ball forward. No doubt he was puzzled by how loudly I was cheering. I almost never cheered at his games, but this game was the final. My son collected the ball that he received from a teammate, broke the defender's ankles with a quick pull back in, shot the ball, and scored. "That's my son! Great goal, Jake!" I yelled, jumping up and down, clapping my hands. My son, knowing where I was in the crowd now, turned and looked at me, a frown crossing his face, even though he was being swarmed by his teammates. I should probably be quieter. It doesn't seem like my son is used to me being so energetic at games. Almost immediately after the Wolves kicked off, my son sprinted in and won the ball, only to be side-tackled by an opposing player. The ref called a foul, but of course I was still livid. "Oh, come on, ref. That's a card. They can't do that to my son." I yelled angrily at the ref. My son got up and started talking to the ref, pointing my way, probably trying to get a card out of the ref, as my son should be doing, since that slide tackle was dirty. I felt a tap on my shoulder and turned around to see a man wearing a Rabbits t-shirt. My son's team. "Excuse me, but why are you yelling at my son Jake?" I was dumbfounded. Could this guy really be that stupid and delusional? "Because I'm his father," I said as snidely as I could, turning back to the field, thinking the conversation was over, only to see the ref right in front of me. "Oh boy, I'm going to get a card for yelling," I thought silently. "Number 8 said you were calling him son, even though he's never seen you before. Is that true?" Everyone in the bleachers and the field were looking at me. "Well, looks like the jig is up," I thought as I slipped the gun out of my inner coat, staring directly at Jake. Let's make my dream become reality. Picture. Katie was my best friend ever since preschool. We had a connection. Maybe it was the shine in her eyes as she laughed, or the glint of her manicured nails in the sun. I realized I was in love. She soon, of course, grew up, and though we stayed friends, I could not help but yearn for her to be mine, us together, face to face, breast to breast, toe to toe. So when I saw her next, I didn't hesitate to ask if I, imposing as it may seem, could come around her home, see how her life was. Katie soon told me she had a boyfriend, and though I was a tad jealous, I came to reality, and I learned my summer love had ended. We enjoyed each other's company, and before I left, I did a sweep of the room, making sure I left nothing behind. A piece of paper was wedged in the drawer, and on it was a picture of her, obviously taken while she was bathing. And oh, how beautiful her body was. Yet my blood ran cold. Her hair was red. This was taken years ago, and I angrily scolded myself. God damn it! She could have found this. It was so hard to obtain as well. How could I be such a klutz? Everything okay, Sophie? Katie yelled, her voice sickly as honey. Yeah, just packing, I responded, folding the picture and slipping it into my pocket. I need to be more careful with this one, I whispered to myself, chuckling as I do. She's much cleverer than most. The woman that never was. My friend called me up 2 weeks ago. She told me she was losing her mind, that her keys, her documents, her cell phone, her laptop, they were in her apartment one day and then gone the next. I drove to her apartment and we talked for an hour. You know, my friend said, it's so ironic. Europe is collapsing. Europeans look down on Americans. It's like their pastime. They'll be fleeing here. It's a matter of time. You'll see. Oh, if I had a magic wand, you know what I'd do? I'd change every single European that wants to live here into a Girl Scout or a cheerleader. It would be hilarious. A lesson in humility for their arrogance. The merry atmosphere quickly turned into dread when my friend realized she could not find her laptop. I told you, she explained. It's like I'm losing my mind. All my presentations for my clients, it's just gone. I told her it would be best to install surveillance in her apartment and see what would be recorded. My friend thought it could even be a poltergeist, but I was quick to point out that some sort of a deranged individual was probably responsible. A stalker who enjoys playing mind games with his victims. Alice assured me she was going to install the surveillance equipment in her apartment to get to the bottom of the insanity. She called me a week later. You know what? She said. I know who did it. Who? I said. It's not the poltergeist, obviously. Oh, no, she replied. But then you'd know that, wouldn't you? It was you all along, bitch. What? I paused. What the hell are you talking about? You're dead, Alice screamed into the phone. You died 5 fucking years ago. You're coming back to haunt me. You're the poltergeist. I know the only way to get rid of the poltergeist is to burn down their locum. That's right. She paused. That's right, bitch. I'm gonna burn your place down. The connection broke off. I dialed the number of our mutual friend. So you don't know? My other friend said. Alice suffered some sort of a mental breakdown about a month ago. She was committed. So I don't know who's on the other end of that line of yours. But it sure as heck wasn't Alice. Chaotic thoughts were racing through my mind. She sounded like her, looked like her, same body language. I went to Alice's apartment with a group of my friends. There was nobody inside. In fact, all the neighbors assured us there was nobody living in the apartment for about a month. the case of the mysterious woman remains unsolved. Charlotte's thong. Charlotte's thong was missing. She knew she hadn't lost it in the wash because she hadn't worn it in ages. It was part of the lingerie that was a gift from her ex-boyfriend. Okay, it was really a gift for him, and she hadn't worn it since the breakup. Oh, it was amicable, the split. No cheating, no hitting. But she still loved him with a desperation that gave her reflux. Anyway, she wasn't a prude. By God, he could attest to that. But wearing a thong, with no one to show it to, riding up the crack of her ass, no thank you. It didn't concern her at first. Well, maybe it did, but only in the way a lost item of any sort that wasn't needed immediately, say a key set, would have. It was the kind of lost item that pops up in the brain during a shower, a car drive, a sleepless, lonely night. Oh, it didn't concern her at first, but then he came. He came on a night when the cloud hid the moon. Quietly he crept, with an abnormal stealth that was practiced. He wanted the rest of the set. The thong looked lonely by itself. He might not have bothered, might have set it aside with the rest of the stolen indelicacies that made up most of his small apartment. But by God, it and her captivated him. His blood rushed and his heart beat when it and her crawled into his mind. In the heart of a healthy man, it would have been love, but he felt no love, and it was a cruel, craven, lust-filled loathing. He would find her. He would get her. And when he did, she slept fitfully that night. Intuition of that vague, womanly sort kept her up. She thought of the thong. Why did it bother her so? And otherwise might not have noticed a slight tremble on the window. And it was slight. He was a practiced man. But she jumped. Her first thought, how foolish. Just the single woman cliched jump scare cat. But she peeked out the windows and saw his eyes, accented by the ski mask, and oh God, in his eyes and on his lips was a hunger that flowed through her blood and trembled her bowels. And she screamed, and he didn't react. He looked at her with curiosity, and he left without even trotting a little. And he was gone, and she was terrified, and the door was locked, and the phone was ringing, and 911, what's your emergency? The officer arrived and took her story down as she vomited out in between tears and chokes and stumbles. As he stepped in to take a look around, she looked at the holster on his belt and felt relieved. She didn't know that she had just let in her stalker. Night Stalker. Jade closed the library as quickly as she could because she was starving. She was happy to have another boring day of work. She made sure the front door was locked and began the long walk home on a fairly quiet night. It was a beautiful night with a cool spring breeze blowing past her, so she took her time. She would gaze at the trees being brushed by the cool wind that was comforting her. It was a fine night for a stroll on the sidewalk until she started to hear some footsteps in the distance behind her. Jade did not hesitate to turn around and was greeted by a young man, only armed with his smile, as he seemingly just wanted to talk to her. Jade stared at him and kept her guard up, despite him approaching her with caution. "Hello, ma'am. Would you be Jade? Jade Morgan? I've seen you once or twice at the library." We made some small talk here and there, the young man claimed, while keeping his distance from her. "I'm sorry, but I've never seen you at the library. Do you go in the morning? Because I mainly work nights, or the afternoon if I'm lucky." Jade responded as politely as she could. The young man seemed to be a bit frustrated with the response, but kept his smile warm to show she wasn't in any trouble. "I know your name isn't Jade," he says, slowly approaching her while trying to reach for something in his coat. "I just need you to come with me, because you have some people who want to talk to you. I believe these people can help you, given the chance. Just work with me here, all right?" the man said while revealing the gun in his jacket to Jade. Jade realized that the man's offer was non-negotiable. This man had been stalking her for a great length of time and was threatening her with a gun. She knew what she was going to do. Jade raised her hands to surrender, and the man seemed relieved he didn't have to hurt her. The feeling of relief would be brief, as he would find himself in a pool of stress 4 seconds later. Jade's neck twitched, and her mouth took a thick red chunk of meat out of his arm. The man fell back in absolute horror, as he could not believe his arm was now missing a quarter of flesh. He screamed as loud as his vocal cords would allow, but he knew the fate that awaited him. Jade's eyes were barely visible, as a man could only see a mouth with rows of metallic teeth being shined on from the streetlight. You would think they would have learned by now. This is the 5th man they sent for me, and he felt the same way they all do. Screaming. Text from a friend. "Hey Molly, I guess this is kind of overdue, but I just wanted to text you to see what was up. We haven't talked for a while. I wanted to check in and make sure everything was cool between us. But you haven't been responding to my texts." Wasn't sure if it was intentional, but ever since we had that fight, it's been kind of radio silence. Anyway, I wanted to make amends. I know you told me I was being too clingy, which I totally get. It did hurt when you told me to leave you alone, but we all say heated stuff in the moment. Anyway, I tried to give you some space, but I didn't want it to go on forever, you know? I tried calling a bunch, but you didn't pick up. And I don't want to stop being friends. So I drove down to see you, just to say hi and check in. You weren't home, so I let myself in with your spare key. And I did some chores to make it up to you. I fed your cat, did your dishes, that sort of thing. I took some of your clothes, too, because honestly, I think they're cuter on me. We're about the same size anyway. Sorry about that. Anyway, I waited in your bed for a while and thought about what I'd say to you. I wrote out a few drafts on your desk, which probably looked a little creepy without context. Anyway, then you came home. I probably scared the shit out of you right? You wouldn't stop screaming, which of course freaked me out. I panicked and jumped out the window and drove home. And since then, it's been a lot of nothing from you. I don't think it was fair for you to call me a stalker in the moment. But whatever. I can forgive and forget. I just really want to put all this in the past so we can go back to being best friends. Okay. Love you, girl. Get back to me as soon as possible. Jill. My love. Hey, how are you? You haven't replied to my messages. Now I know, I've sent a lot of them. But the least you can do is reply. I just want to hear that soft voice of yours. Those cute lips, your smooth face. I just want you next to me again. Do you remember our date? We were at your house. It was dark out, and I had to let myself in. Now that was red flag number 1. You should have opened the door for me. But I pushed your rudeness aside and headed upstairs and saw, not ready for our date. I was mad. I wanted to teach you a lesson. So I made my way downstairs and grabbed a knife, just to scare you and teach you not to do that again. I ran upstairs expecting an apology. I opened the door, and you just stood there, shocked. I had to teach you. My hand slipped. I didn't mean to. I did. I did mean to. You deserve it. How long have we known each other? 1, 2 years now? I'm in court because of you. They're saying I'm a stalker, that I'm sick in the head. How am I in the wrong? I know I'm going to go away because of you. But when I get out, let's have our second date. Bumper Stalker. My first bump occurred a few hours ago as I headed home from work down a deserted dirt road. The night was still and silent. The car, or whatever it was, came out of nowhere and bumped me from behind. I never saw any car, but I figured that this was due to the darkness. "Asshole!" I shouted and sped away a little faster. I normally headed home along a much busier street, but my creep of a supervisor advised me to try this route. Perhaps he was the one who bumped me, I remember thinking. Now I'm not sure what to think. I'm too stressed to process anything. I stopped at an oddly old-fashioned gas station, advertising meatball subs, with its neon sign lit up like a beacon. I asked the uninterested girl who worked there if any local jerks got their sick kicks from driving around without headlights on. But the girl said, "Nah, sugar, not that I know of," and shortchanged me. I was too tired to argue. I still had a ways to go before I got home, 'cause I work a good few miles out from anywhere, in just about the last lumber mill in the country. I work long hours and stay late. I regret that now. It's almost daylight, and I'm still not home. I fear I'll never make it. I carried on down the road, nervously glancing back behind me the whole time. And suddenly, I got bumped from the front. I yelled in terror, my voice suddenly stifled as I was bumped from behind. My neck cracked back, and I gargled a raspy rattle. I stopped by the side of the road, darting my eyes all around for any glint of metal, but saw nothing, heard nothing, felt nothing but agony as something bumped me so forcefully that I almost flipped over. I screamed many obscenities, cut off by sudden bumps from both sides. A sudden shunt from behind sent me hurtling down the road. My body is so battered and bruised that practically anything I attempt is agonizing now. I left the road at a crawl, after a last smash sounded like bone cracking. I am effectively immobilized, crying, begging to be left alone. I thought I might be safe, away from the road, until another thwack left me lying on my side amidst some dying grass. As dawn breaks, I can see the city where I live, maybe half a mile away. I can see the neon gas station sign, blinking, back the way I came. I can see no cars at all, no trucks, no motorcycles, no vehicles at all, in any direction. I wondered if my persecutor is nocturnal, and received a reply that paralyzed. And what's left of my mind, I wish I'd accepted a ride home from my supervisor. I wish my trusty Nissan wasn't still in the shop. I wish I hadn't tried to walk home. She's always watching. Have you ever had a stalker? If you said yes, you know how scary that is. Even if the stalker isn't much of a threat to you physically, just knowing you're being watched, wondering if someone is going to creep out of the closet, leaves you feeling vulnerable and afraid. You can call the police, sure. Get a restraining order if you want. You could even move, change your phone number. For more desperate measures, you can turn to violence, maybe even kill them if it comes to that. The point is, you have options. But what do you do when your stalker isn't alive? Calling the police won't help. Can't arrest what you can't see. Same is true for any violence against it. So what do you do? In my case, I've had my ghostly stalker since I was about 9. I won't go into all the times she's terrified me to death, or the times I've begged my parents to make her go away. Believe me, it was a hard few years of doctors, medication, and bedwetting before I learned that pretending she wasn't there was the best course. The nights were the worst. I was alone with her, in the dark. My nightlight never seemed bright enough. I tried not looking at her, but her presence was just so consuming that it made focusing on anything else impossible. So I'd watch her standing across my room, her long stringy hair draped over her shoulders, her pale skin seeming to glow in the darkness. The ghost, as I've taken to calling her, has never harmed me or even spoke to me. She only ever stood there, her black eyes focused on me with such intensity, and her pale fingers curled as if ready to sink those sharpened fingernails into my flesh. Her stare never wavers. She never blinks. I'm all she sees, or so I thought. Last night, I woke from a nightmare that left me drenched in sweat. I immediately saw her staring at me, but even in the darkness, I knew something was different. Her face, which had always been void of any emotion, was twisted in rage. Her lips were pulled back so that I could see almost every tooth. Her body looked tense, as if ready to pounce. I wanted to run, but something stopped me. Something thin and gray, with skin dry and cracked, shuffled from under my bed, its hideous face gaping up at me, all smiles and teeth. It uncoiled its long fingers, reaching for me, but before it could grab me, My ghostly stalker lunged. She was on the thing from under my bed in a flash. I squeezed my eyes shut, but that didn't stop the sounds I heard. She was still there this morning, her fingernails caked with dried blood, that same intensity in her eyes. And she's still there now, watching and waiting, never looking away, her stare never wavering. And I pray it never does. Good neighbors. The neighborhood has really gone downhill. I would know. I've lived here over 30 years. I'm the last of the old guard. Everyone else has either died or moved away. No one left but me to keep an eye on things. Like Miss Morales across the street. A woman living alone is preposterous. It isn't safe, especially when they dress like hussies. I swear, there's not a day goes by that I can't catch a glimpse of that woman's knees. I'm sure her mother would be ashamed if she knew. Then there's the Joneses' dog. Ratty little thing, always yapping day and night. I can barely hear my shows in the evening. I've made my displease quite clear to the Joneses, but they just brush it off. Says he's a rescue. He has anxiety. Who ever heard of a dog with anxiety? Thing needs to be beaten good and proper. That's what I think. And finally, the Juan kid. Little brat. He's always riding his bike at ungodly speeds down the sidewalk. Gives me a heart attack when I get my mail and he zooms past. One of these days, he's gonna mow someone down. I'm not the only one who notices all this. I see it in my neighbors' faces. They see how the street's disintegrating, but they're too afraid to step on anyone's toes. So it's up to me to do something about it. Of course, I need a few things first. When the Uber arrives, I hobble outside, stuffing my list in my pocket. It's a simple thing, just 3 items long. Newspaper, antifreeze, and fishing wire. Mr. Jones is watering his bushes as I shuffle down the walk. "Hey, Mrs. Gilly," he calls with an idiotic grin. "How you doing today?" My voice wobbles in answer. "I'm just fine, young man. I hope you're doing well." Of course, of course." He glances at the waiting car. "Do you need help getting in?" "Thanks for the offer, but I'll manage." It's a relief to finally settle into the back seat. The driver mumbles something, then pulls away. Good thing he's not the chatty type. I value my privacy. I pull out my list and look over it one more time. A newspaper, just the thing to create an ominous note from a stalker who's taking a liking to Miss Morales's promiscuous ways. Antifreeze. I've already got the steak, which I'm sure that yappy little dog will just love. And fishing wire. It shouldn't be too hard to string it between my fence and the fire hydrant. If I do it right, that brat will never see it coming. Yes, I think, smiling with satisfaction. It's up to me to keep this neighborhood on the up and up. And I am more than up to the task. Midnight smoke. Connor kissed his daughter goodnight and followed his wife to the doorway of their child's bedroom. He stood by the light switch for a moment, letting her snuggle in. "Good night, sweetie," they said, and he flicked off the light. "Night, Mommy. Night, Daddy," she said, and they walked away, leaving the door cracked. Connor followed his wife down the hall. When she turned to the bedroom, he brushed past her to the living room. "You're not coming to bed?" she asked, and he scratched his head. "I'm just going to step outside really quick, get some air," he said, already pulling on his coat. "I thought you were quitting," she said, her scowl harsher than her words. I know. I'm working on it. Just real quick before I lock up," he said shamefully. She eyed him for a moment and waved him on. Connor pulled open the slider to the balcony, shivering against the outside air before shutting it. This was winter's second coming in February, or third or fourth it seemed. Shrugging against the wind, Connor got out a smoke and lit it. His drag and exhale were slow, hoping to lift the weight that seemed to be bogging him down. Work, bills, car trouble, stress in every imaginable form was trying a balancing act on his shoulders. He just wanted a minute of peace. The snow was coming down. Connor looked at the flakes dancing around through the cherries' glow. Despite the harsh temperature, it comforted him. He stopped mid-drag and coughed, noticing something in the whiteout across the road. There was a man across the street, and he was watching him. Connor rubbed his eyes and looked again. He had moved a little closer, like one leaping step. Squinting, Connor waved at him as he tried to make out the details. People walked up and down the road all the time, but they never just stopped. He was just standing there, mouth slightly open. Connor looked around in the heavy snow, but he was the only one on the balconies. He looked back and jumped. The man had crossed the street, head still angled up, not moving at all. "Can I help you?" he shouted down. No response. What the fuck? He thought, turning to look inside. The living room was empty. His wife and child were still in their rooms. He turned back, hoping it was just his imagination. The man was in the front yard, same frozen look of expectation. "I said, can I help you?" Connor yelled. He dug out his phone to call the police. After dialing the digits, he checked on the stalker. The man was outside the apartment door now, hand on the knob, looking straight up, smiling. He looked just like him. Before Connor could speak, the man winked. Connor turned, reaching for the door. Pounding steps raced up the hallway stairs. The slider was frozen shut. Through the glass, he saw the front door open.